July 12th, 1979, a Brooklyn restaurant patio. 3 masked gunmen walk in. Seconds later, Carmine Galante is dead with a cigar still clenched between his teeth. But to understand why nearly every Mafia family wanted him gone, we need to go back to East Harlem. Carmine Galante was born Camillo Carmine Galante on February 21st, 1910, in a tenement building in East Harlem, Manhattan. His parents, Vincenzo Galante and Vincenzo Russo, were Sicilian immigrants from Castellammare del Golfo who had arrived in New York a few years earlier. His father worked as a fisherman while the family tried to build a life in the city. Galante grew up in a crowded working-class neighborhood where street gangs, petty crime, and violence were common parts of daily life. From an early age, he showed a rebellious streak and had trouble with authority. By the time he was 10 years old, he had already been sent to reform school because of his criminal behavior. After returning, he drifted further into the streets instead of school. He later dropped out after the 7th grade and began spending more time with neighborhood gangs. Those early years in East Harlem shaped the man he would become, aggressive, fearless, and already comfortable living outside the law. As a teenager, Carmine Galante moved deeper into street crime on New York's Lower East Side. He joined youth gangs, took part in robberies, and built a reputation for violence while still in his teens. Legitimate work came and went, including jobs sorting fish and working in an artificial flower shop. But crime was already becoming his real path. On December 12, 1925, the 15-year-old Galante pleaded guilty to assault charges. A year later, on December 22, 1926, he was sentenced to at least 2.5 years in state prison. It was an early sign that jail would become a recurring part of his life. In 1930, he was arrested in connection with the killing of police officer Walter de Castilla during a payroll robbery, though he was never indicted. That same year, he was caught trying to hijack a truck in Brooklyn. During the gunfight that followed, Galante wounded a police officer and accidentally hit a 6-year-old girl. After pleading guilty to attempted robbery, he was sentenced on February 8, 1931, to 12.5 years in prison. While incarcerated, prison doctors described him as having a psychopathic personality, emotionally cold and difficult to rehabilitate. He remained behind bars for most of the decade before being released on parole on May 1, 1939. Police suspected Galante had been involved in more than 80 murders, though many were never proven. When Carmine Galante was released on parole in May 1939, he stepped back into organized crime almost immediately. He aligned himself with the Bonanno organization and became closely connected to Joe Bonanno, another man whose roots trace back to Castellammare del Golfo. Around the same time, he also worked with powerful underworld figure Vito Genovese. By the early 1940s, Galante was being used as an enforcer and hitman. Police believed he was involved in numerous murders, and his name began carrying weight in New York's criminal world. He was known for sudden violence, loyalty to his bosses, and a willingness to do jobs others avoided. His most famous alleged killing came on January 11, 1943, when anti-fascist newspaper publisher Carlo Tresca was shot outside his Manhattan office. According to later accounts, Genovese wanted Tresca dead while trying to gain favor with Benito Mussolini in Italy, and Galante was suspected of carrying out the murder. No one was ever convicted, but the case strengthened Galante's image as one of the Mafia's most dangerous men. After the Tresca case, Galante was returned to prison for violating parole. He was released again on December 21, 1944, with his reputation now far greater than when he first entered prison years earlier. What catches my attention here is how Galante's real rise began when violence became useful to men above him. Plenty of street criminals are dangerous, but few become trusted weapons inside a mafia family. Once his name carried fear, doors opened that ordinary earners never see. By this stage, he was no longer chasing status. Status was starting to chase him. On February 10, 1945, Carmine Galante married Helen Marulli. Together they had 3 children, James, Camille, and Angela. Though married, the relationship later broke down, but the two never formally divorced. Galante would later claim he remained married because he considered himself a good Catholic. For roughly the last 2 decades of his life, Galante lived with Anne Aquavella. The couple had 2 children together, giving him a total of 5 children between both relationships. While his criminal reputation grew, he also maintained a separate domestic life away from public attention. Like many mob figures of the era, Galante used legitimate businesses as cover and income fronts. He owned the Racina Costume Company in Brooklyn and was connected to the Abco Vending Company in West New York, New Jersey. These businesses helped present the image of a working businessman, while authorities continued linking him to organized crime. After returning to the streets in the mid-1940s, Carmine Galante moved deeper into the Bonanno organization and became one of Joe Bonanno's most reliable men. The two shared Sicilian roots in Castellammare del Golfo, and Bonanno valued loyalty above almost everything else. Galante fit that model perfectly. He first worked closely with Bonanno as a driver and bodyguard, then gradually took on larger responsibilities. As the years passed, Galante rose through the ranks from soldier to capo, proving useful in both enforcement and business matters. He had a reputation for handling problems quickly and without hesitation. Unlike men who shifted alliances, Galante remained firmly tied to Bonanno. That loyalty helped him gain trust inside the family and positioned him for even greater authority. By the early 1950s, he had become one of the most powerful figures in the Bonanno crew and was ready for a larger role. He was rarely seen without a cigar in his mouth, earning the nicknames the Cigar and Lilo, Sicilian slang for a stubby cigar. In 1953, Joe Bonanno sent Carmine Galante to Montreal, Quebec, to strengthen the family's operations in Canada. It was a major promotion and a sign of how much trust Bonanno placed in him. Galante's job was to expand gambling rackets, collect profits, and oversee the growing narcotics business. Montreal became a key hub in what later became known as the French Connection. Heroin was moved from Europe into Canada, then smuggled across the border into the United States. Galante worked closely with figures such as Vincenzo Cotroni and helped build a profitable pipeline that connected Sicilian suppliers, French processors, and North American distributors. Authorities also believed he was bringing in huge gambling revenue while using intimidation to control territory. His methods were aggressive, and complaints about extortion and violence followed him. By April 1956, the Canadian government had enough and deported Galante back to the United States. After returning from Canada, Carmine Galante remained deeply involved in the international narcotics trade. In October 1957, he and Joe Bonanno attended a major Mafia meeting in Palermo, Sicily, where American and Sicilian bosses discussed expanding heroin shipments into the United States. Among those present were Lucky Luciano and leading Sicilian figures such as Giuseppe Genco Russo. That same era also saw Galante tied to the powerful Appalachian meeting in New York, a gathering that exposed the scale of organized crime in America. By now, he was no longer just an enforcer. He had become a key link between New York and Sicily. Galante began bringing young Sicilian men from Castellammare del Golfo into the Bonanno family. These recruits became known as the Zips. He trusted them more than many American-born gangsters and used them as bodyguards, contract killers, and drug couriers. Their loyalty gave him a private power base inside the family. In 1958, Galante was indicted on narcotics conspiracy charges and went into hiding for a time. On June 3, 1959, police arrested him after stopping his car on the Garden State Parkway, ending another chapter of his rise. One thing I find interesting is how Galante always thought bigger than neighborhood rackets. Montreal, Sicily, heroin routes, and the Zips show a man building his own international power base. He trusted blood ties and old country loyalty more than many men born in New York. That gave him strength, but it also made others wonder if he was becoming too independent. By the late 1950s, federal authorities were closing in on Carmine Galante's narcotics network. In 1958, he was indicted on drug conspiracy charges connected to the growing heroin trade. Rather than face the case immediately, Galante went into hiding until his arrest in 1959. Legal pressure increased again on May 18, 1960, when Galante was hit with a second set of narcotics charges. He surrendered voluntarily and prepared for a major federal trial. Prosecutors viewed him as one of the most important figures in organized crime's drug business. The first trial began in November 1960, but quickly descended into chaos. Jurors and alternates dropped out, witnesses faced pressure, and the courtroom atmosphere was marked by intimidation and disruption. On May 15, 1961, the judge declared a mistrial. Galante was also sentenced to a short jail term for contempt of court. A second trial followed. This time, prosecutors secured a conviction. On July 10, 1962, Carmine Galante was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison and fined $20,000. At 52 years old, many believed his career was finished. After serving more than a decade behind bars, Carmine Galante was released on parole in January 1974. He returned to New York and found the Bonanno family weakened by years of internal conflict, leadership struggles, and the forced retirement of Joe Bonanno. The organization was vulnerable, and Galante saw an opening immediately. According to reports, one of his first acts after release was symbolic revenge. He allegedly ordered the bombing of the private mausoleum doors of former underworld power Frank Costello, who had died the year before. It was a message that Galante had come back aggressive and unafraid. On February 23, 1974, the Mafia Commission officially named Philip Rusty Restelli as boss of the Bonanno family. But Galante had no intention of accepting a secondary role. He ignored the appointment, built support around himself, and acted as if real authority belonged to him. When Restelli was sent to prison in 1976, Galante moved fully into power. Though never formally recognized as boss, he seized practical control of the Bonanno family and became its de facto leader. Once Carmine Galante took control of the Bonanno family, he moved fast to expand power and profits. Narcotics remained at the center of his empire, and the heroin trade was bringing in enormous money. Investigators believe Galante was earning millions while trying to dominate distribution routes across New York. He surrounded himself with loyal Sicilian bodyguards and traffickers known as the Zips, including Cesare Bonventre and Baldassare Amato. Galante trusted them more than many American-born mobsters and used them as personal protection and as muscle inside the family. Their presence made clear that his authority depended on loyalty and fear. At the same time, Galante's rivalry with the Gambino family intensified. He was accused of organizing murders against rivals as he tried to take over larger portions of the narcotics business. Whether every claim was true or not, the belief that he was expanding through violence spread quickly through the underworld. What truly alarmed the other families was Galante's attitude. He openly carried himself like the most powerful man in New York and was increasingly described as calling himself the boss of bosses. That ambition threatened the Mafia Commission itself. By 1979, leaders from the other families had decided Galante had become too dangerous to leave in power. Galante had grown so confident in his own power that he often moved around without carrying a gun. He even reportedly told a journalist, "No one will ever kill me. They wouldn't dare." To me, the biggest mistake was not ambition itself, but making ambition visible. Many bosses wanted more, but they knew how to hide it behind diplomacy. Galante moved in a way that made everyone feel threatened at the same time. Once other families believe you want everything, they usually decide you should get nothing. Ego often speaks loudest right before the fall. By the summer of 1979, Carmine Galante had too many enemies and too much power. The Mafia Commission approved a contract on his life after growing alarmed over his attempt to dominate the narcotics market and act above the rules of the five families. On July 12, 1979, Galante went to lunch at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn. He sat on the outdoor patio with his cousin Giuseppe Turano, Bonanno capo Leonard Coppola, and his trusted Sicilian bodyguards Baldassare Amato and Cesare Bonventre. At approximately 2:45 p.m., 3 masked gunmen entered the restaurant and walked directly to the patio. Moments later, they opened fire with shotguns and handguns. Galante, Turano, and Coppola were killed almost instantly in a burst of gunfire. What shocked many observers was that Galante's bodyguards were left unharmed and had done nothing to stop the attack. That detail immediately fueled suspicions that betrayal had made the hit possible. When police photographed the scene, Galante was still lying on the ground with a cigar clenched in his mouth, creating one of the most famous images in Mafia history. What stands out most is how calm power can disappear in seconds. Galante sat surrounded by men, bodyguards, and reputation, yet none of it mattered when the decision had already been made above him. The untouched bodyguards tell their own story without saying a word. In that world, betrayal is often cleaner than battle. The cigar in his mouth became famous, but the real image was total isolation. Carmine Galante's murder was meant to restore order inside the Bonanno family, but it did the opposite. Instead of stability, his death opened the door to new factional warfare as rival captains and crews fought for influence. Old tensions that had been held down by fear now rose to the surface. 2 major camps soon formed around Alphonse Sunny Red Indelicato and Dominic Sunny Black Napolitano. The power struggle grew more dangerous over the next 2 years and exploded in 1981 with the infamous 3 captains' murders when Sunny Red Indelicato, Dominic Trinchera, and Philip Giacconi were killed during an internal setup. Violence continued after that. Sunny Black Napolitano was later murdered after it was discovered that undercover FBI agent Donnie Brasco had infiltrated his crew. In 1984, Cesare Bonventre, one of the bodyguards who survived Galante's assassination, was found murdered in a New Jersey warehouse, reportedly to keep him silent. Some men involved in Galante's killing eventually faced prison. Anthony Bruno Indelicato was later convicted in connection with the murders during the commission case era. By the late 1980s, the Bonanno family was weakened, divided, and still dealing with the consequences of the day Galante was gunned down on a Brooklyn patio. One thing I find interesting is how killing Galante solved the immediate problem but created new ones right away. Strongmen often hold factions together through fear, and once they are gone, old grudges come back fast. The Bonanno family entered years of bloodshed, setups, and mistrust. That tells me the organization was unstable long before the shooting. Sometimes removing one man exposes a deeper sickness underneath.